turned off or switched to silent. Thank you. The Services Delegated Committee meeting is being live streamed on the Council website, so you'll be able to view the proceedings of the meeting, councillor deliberations and voting. The meeting's also being recorded and will be made available on the Council website as soon as practicable after the meeting. Should technical problems be encountered during the meeting will be adjourned until the problem is rectified, or if needed, the meeting will be postponed. My name is Councillor Jane Addis, Chair of this committee. I'll start by introducing my fellow councillors and officers. Seated to my left at the horseshoe table in the council chamber are Councillor Jim Park, Councillor Susan Bigger, Councillor Cynthia Watson, Councillor Nick Stavrou, who is joining us remotely this evening, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, and moving round the table we have Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, Councillor Wes Gold, Councillor Di Gillies, our Mayor, Councillor Gary Thompson, and Councillor Victor Franco. The officers in attendance tonight: to my immediate right, Philip Storer, the Chief Executive Officer. To my left and behind Councillor Stavrou, we have Carolyn McLean, Director Community Support, and Daniel Freer, Director Places and Spaces. And to my right at the moment, I think we only have Sharan Wickramasinghe, Director Urban Living. To my immediate left, David Thompson, Manager Governance and Legal, and further to his left, Elizabeth Manu, Senior Governance Officer. And there are also a number of other staff members in attendance this evening to assist us. The purpose of the Services Delegated Committee is to deal with issues relating to the provision of human and physical services and Council's infrastructure. For those in the gallery presenting this evening, when we come to the agenda item, it will be introduced by an officer. I'll then call on you one by one to come forward and address Council. When making a submission, you are requested to present your viewpoint clearly and concisely on why you agree or disagree with the proposal, and you may also suggest an alternative approach which will satisfy your concerns. If you could please not repeat what other speakers have said, and as much as possible keep your discussion focused on relevant issues. There's a limit of 3 minutes for each speaker, and that does include councillors. I'll ask speakers to come forward to the lectern, and we'll invite those against the item to speak first, followed by those in favour. At the 2.5 minute mark, I will ring the bell, which will indicate you have 30 seconds remaining and you will need to conclude your presentation. After you've spoken, if you could remain standing while I ask if any councillor has a question for you. We'll now move to apologies. Mr Thompson, are there any apologies for this evening?
Through you, Madam Chair, there are no apologies for this evening.
Thank you very much. Adoption and confirmation of the minutes of the Services Delegated Committee meeting held on 15th of March 2021. Councillors, can I please have a motion to adopt and confirm the minutes? Councillor Bigger, you're happy to move the motion?
Yes, I am, thank you.
And seconded Councillor Thompson? Thank you. Councillors, is anyone opposed to the motion? No. Councillor Bigger, did you wish to speak to your motion? No. Okay, thank you. So look, I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Thank you. So I'll declare that one carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 2 is declaration of conflict of interest of any councillor or council officers. Councillors and council officers, are there any conflicts of interest that need to be declared? I can't see any, so no, thank you. Now we'll move to presentation of officers' reports. Item 3.1, proposed City of Borondara motions for the Municipal Association of Victoria, MAV, State Council on 21 May 2021. And I believe Mr Thompson, Manager of Governance and Legal, is going to present that report.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. Councillors, before you tonight are the proposed 4 motions to be put to the Municipal Association of Victoria State Council meeting on the 21st of May. The details of each motion is set out in your business papers at pages 6 to 12. The motions sponsored by Council have the potential to achieve worthwhile results for the Burundara community and the broader Victorian community. The proposed motions have been prepared in consultation with the Executive Leadership Team, and there are no direct financial implications to Council in presenting these motions to the MAV State Council meeting. Regrettably, the motions submitted by colleagues to Governance and published with the agenda contain minor typos and grammatical errors. The necessary corrections have been made, and councillors were provided with a clean copy of the 4 motions earlier this afternoon. Should councillors be of a mind to adopt the officer's recommendation, the 4 motions which will be annexed to the minutes will reflect the corrections made. I now therefore commend the officer's recommendation, as on the screen behind me, to the Services Delegated Committee this evening.
Thank you, Mr Thompson. We have, I think, one speaker wishing to present tonight. And if I could call Mr Greg Price up to the lectern, please. And for the record, if you could please state your name and address and interest, and whether you're for or against the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thanks. My name's Greg Price. Address is 2A Barina Road in Glen Iris. I'm here to talk in support of motion 4, so I think that's a worthwhile endeavour and is probably worth addressing in the wider MAV forum. I want to speak against motion 3. My concern is that the motion is too broad, and it's also the wrong forum to be addressed. Essentially, the details in the text was around the fact that there were a couple of houses that we couldn't get heritage protected, which there was a desire to because they didn't reach the threshold. I have an overall concern with the way heritage is being approached in Burundara. Essentially, in the community feedback surveys, both in 2017 and 2021, only 99% of survey respondents said that protecting heritage was important, whereas up in the teens, say 15 and 13% and 16 or so percent, were more interested in restricting new development and preventing development which is not in keeping with the character of the neighbourhood. Further, reading some of the recent heritage gap studies, there are more than 10,000 properties that are heritage protected in Burundara, and according to some recent statements, a further 5,000 to come. I've been at previous meetings when officers have said they would like to have heritage protection on every property, but they can't reach state government thresholds. The issue that I have with is that it's not about heritage, it's about neighbourhood character. And while I do believe that there are very important heritage properties that need protecting in council, and I'm certainly not one for going and demolishing everything, I think there needs to be a much better balance. And so typically I don't think I've ever seen a significant property that wasn't worthy of heritage protection, and certainly there are a number of properties which would ordinarily be graded as contributory, which deserve some kind of protection. I'm not sure if they have heritage significance in the traditional sense, but the point is that if you go around and talk to a lot of the residents, they all talk about these lovely old houses, and they talk about the streetscape and the leafy green areas and things like that. And yet, when heritage is decided by the external consultants and the experts, it's done in a very clinical fashion rather than from a cultural fashion, because when people want to walk down the streets, they like they like their neighbourhoods. I think that the controls should be applied very locally. If people care about an area, they've invested in there. They put their money where their mouth is, and it shouldn't be decided by people that are necessarily outside their neighbourhood unless it reaches a very high threshold, like a significant property. So contributory properties, I think, should be further down. Hence, I think it's a localised Boroondara issue, and it should be addressed through the Boroondara planning scheme through some other means to go and protect properties, because the cited examples there were typically the lovely old houses that people like to walk past, but there was nothing indicating that there was something significant about the internal, say a famous person had lived there or so forth.
Get you to wrap up?
And I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillors, are there any questions for Mr Price? I can't see any. Thank you, Mr Price.
Thanks very much.
If you'd like to return to your seat. Now hand back to Mr Thompson for any responses.
Through you, Madam Chair, should there be any responses to the issues raised by Mr Price, I'd invite my colleague, Mr Wickramasinghe, to respond to the heritage items.
Thank you.
Through you, Chair, very briefly. I think it's fair to say that heritage, amongst many other things, is very important to the Boroondara community, and for there to be a consideration that inappropriate development is important to the Boroondara community does not mean that heritage is not. And therefore, Council, when it commenced its Heritage Gap Study in 2016, was actually responding overwhelmingly to the community's interest. With respect to this particular motion, it is evident that contributory buildings that aren't part of precincts are being lost within Boroondara. And on that basis, it is incumbent on us to try and achieve a level of protection for those properties. And what this motion is seeking to achieve is to get the state government's attention through our peak body to start a conversation about affording them protection. There is an opportunity at the moment because the Minister is about to review the Heritage Practice Note, and this is the right time to do so. And by raising this matter at the MAV, it also enables other local governments who may be experiencing similar problems to actually join us and support what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you, Mr Wickramasinghe. Are there any questions, councillors, for officers? There being none, so I'm in search of a motion. Councillor Hollingsworth, you have a motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I would like to support the officer's recommendation.
I think you might have mentioned you had something you wanted to add, or are you happy with?
Yes, look, there is an inclusion that I would like to put forward. I thought it might be best to work with the original motions first and then talk to the amendment with regard to the final motion. But if we would like to discuss this amendment first, happy to do so.
So which motion would you like to actually move as your motion, Councillor Hollingsworth?
So I would like to go with the recommendation, I believe, that was just put up on the screen that has an inclusion to do with the ESV tree canopy. Thank you.
Sorry, through you, Madam Chair, and to assist the meeting, it's officers' understanding that Councillor Hollingsworth wishes to move the officer's recommendation, but Councillor Hollingsworth wishes to draw to the attention of her colleagues and members of the community with respect to the rationale in motion 4 that she has some additional wording that she would like to put forward for consideration for her colleagues, acknowledging that the officer's recommendation is that the MAV motions in its totality, including the motion and the rationale, is what Council is adopting to be annexed to the minutes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr Thompson.
So the officer's recommendation, but with these changes.
With the inclusion of the extra paragraph, yes, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hollingsworth. Councillor Watson, you've got your light on.
I'm happy to second.
Thank you very much. To assist Councillor Hollingsworth, is anyone opposed to these motions? There doesn't appear to be. So Councillor Hollingsworth, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, with the 4 motions put before us, first of all, I'd like to thank Mr Thompson as the Manager of Governance for all the work that he's done compiling this, but also the Executive Leadership Team for preparing the motions and going to a great extent of detail to explain the significance of each one. So with the 4 motions put before us on 4 different topics, on the 21st of May, myself as the MAV delegate, as representative of Boroondara, will go to an MAV forum where we put forward state motions. These motions are then considered and ideally, hopefully, elevated. But these motions aren't just representative of Boroondara, they're often reflective of all of Victoria and possibly even more at a national level. So the issues that we raise, certainly within Victoria, are prevalent issues. So one of them being with the concern with the early years infrastructure strategy with the Victorian Government's kindergarten reform initiative. There is concern that there may not be sufficient funding under this new reform to enable not just Boroondara but other municipalities to fund what is necessary with regard to infrastructure renewal in the early learning 3-year-old kinder sections. Rather than go into a lot of detail about that, I'll leave it as the motion is put before us. One of the other motions here is to do with homelessness, which is obviously a very serious and growing concern amongst all of our communities. Now, in Boroondara, we acknowledge that we're very fortunate to have the Salvation Army, who do an amazing job caring for those that are homeless or rough sleepers within community. But with the growth of numbers and the growth in concern, we ask that the state or MAV put forward this motion at state level to consider the need for additional funding to help support those most vulnerable. Just looking at the information here, in 2019, we had 110 reports of homeless people doing it very, very difficult. Going back to 2009, there was only 7 reports, so that indicates that there's quite a significant increase over the last 10 years. With regard to the item that Mr Price spoke to, and thank you, Mr Price, for your presentation, to acknowledge the need for more to be done in the area of heritage overlay, heritage protection and consideration towards heritage assets. The recommendation is suggesting that there be more consideration to a challenging dilemma that we have at the moment, that with reference to the planning practice note, applying heritage overlay can only be provided to properties that are considered of contributory heritage value if they form part of a precinct. Now, in recent times, we've actually had brought to our attention here in the chamber a very significant property owned by a Mr Bartholomew Santa Maria. That property was a standalone property. It didn't form part of a precinct. Architecturally, it was of very notable character and of heritage value, but it was also significant because of the fact of the person who lived there being someone that did so much for the Boroondara community in the field of advocating for reform to all schools. He was a person who had a program on TV called Point of View, and he was also a very powerful influence in the field of politics. More recently, it's come to our attention too that another house that's obtained heritage overlay is one of Pompey Elliott, who was one of Victoria's leading and legendary war heroes that served at Gallipoli and then went into politics as well. That's just an example of 2 that may not have had protection under the current regime, and it's only fortunate that certain material was brought to surface to be able to protect those properties. So what this motion is seeking is consideration to individual homes that may not meet necessarily significant criteria, but certainly are worthy of contributory status, and to implement a regime that actually can consider them in heritage consideration, where if they're not forming part of a precinct, they may still be deemed appropriate for heritage overlay grading and protection. And look, lastly, I just wanted to talk to a motion that is very much important to all of us here in Boroondara and many other municipalities across Victoria, and that's to do with the electricity safety, electric line clearance regulations. The regulations basically compel council to be compliant with what is stipulated, and the requirements basically enforce that a fairly large clearance of tree limbs around electricity power poles be pruned back to be compliant. Now, the risk of this is that as our historic mature trees become more established and form part of the streetscape, the more aggressive the pruning, the more risk there is to damaging of major support limbs, and also this is at a huge cost to community. It's my understanding that council is spending approximately $2 million per year, and that figure will only increase as our trees become more established. If on top of the cost of the pruning, then we also have the obligation that if we do not follow the compliance of the electric line clearance, that there is the risk of penalty units of up to close to $42,000 per incident. So it is difficult. We want to maintain our streetscapes. We know that as land is becoming subdivided, properties are demolished and new homes are built, and the loss of established gardens, unfortunately, is reducing. We're very, very reliant on our nature strip trees to provide the green canopy in what people love as part of Boroondara and expect to be maintained in Boroondara. So anything that can be done to help reduce the aggressive pruning of the nature strip trees to help support the structural limbs, I very much support and would ask my fellow colleagues to also support the motions before us. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hollingsworth. Councillor Watson, you were the seconder. Did you have anything to add?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Look, I might just put the motion rather than going back to you, Councillor. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Gold.
I just put it on. Through you, Madam Chair, are we going to discuss each of these motions separately, or are we voting on them in bulk?
As a group.
As a group. So do we get a chance to comment on them as we go through? Or,
If you would.
I'd like
now,
to.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on any of them.
Please feel free if you would like to make a comment.
Should I go through each of them now, or?
Is there one if you have concerns with maybe one of them, could you highlight the one you have concerns
Well, three of them I wanted to make comment on,
okay.
And I thought others might as well. To do with I found the motion 2 on homelessness services, I thought we could have been more specific as to what we were trying to achieve through that motion. I agree with all the sentiments and what's aired, but I thought we would have come up with something a bit more specific. And I also, and maybe this isn't the sort of motion and the MAV aren't the sort of group to put this to, but surely the solution for homelessness for many are to find homes. And is there any way of encouraging development within our municipality of homes for those who currently find themselves as rough sleepers? And I'd be very pleased if we could see some airing of that within our municipality. On motion number 3, I agree with what's been said to date, but I just wonder if we should be trying to move away from tying the individual homes that we see as meritorious from contributory areas to focus on some that might have merit within themselves. A moment ago we talked about areas that were diminished. We lose houses in good areas. The more we lose, the less protection we have for those that are left. But surely there are some houses, like some we've looked at recently, and ones that have been mentioned tonight, that have a great deal of merit about them, but they're not necessarily contributory, and they're not necessarily in an overlay area. And should we be trying to move that legislation away from relying on local and area overlays to more consideration in certain instances of the individual buildings. And motion 4, I just felt that we had a great deal of discussion about tree pruning, and I also felt maybe under that particular motion there could have been somewhat more detail put forward to the MAV about how we want to tackle this. I'd understood from memory that it had been brought about by changes in the supply authorities of how they approach trees. Do we want them to go back to the previous rules? Do we want to tighten up on those? Should we be more specific about what we're putting to the MAV?
So, Mr. Storer?
Perhaps if I may just provide, first of all, a general response, then perhaps ask each of the directors to provide you with some more detail on each of the items that might be helpful. The general response would be to say that we are putting these motions before the 79 local governments in the state. And what we need to do is to get sufficient support for this to become part of the MAV's work plan and the commitment they will then advocate for as the local government peak body. So these need to be worded in a way where they will appeal to a broad enough audience to get started. And it may well be that once the process of advocacy and the modelling of it begins, then the messages can be refined in a way where you can get down to a higher level of detail, if you like. But it might be helpful for each of the directors just to provide some insight into the points you've raised, because I think that you've raised some interesting questions which might be helpful to all councillors to hear the responses to those. Mm-hmm. So perhaps if we could start with
Ms McLean.
Just through the chair, in terms of the homelessness issue, Council has been advocating for quite some time to the state government to provide what we would call, I suppose, the partnership approach with people who are homeless, and being able to reach out to them to try and bring them into the support services net, if you like, is a major funding flaw in our view, because if the Salvation Army can't be funded to actually be able to connect with people who are homeless, then how do we actually assist them get the services, including homes, that could be available? And we've certainly seen a huge upsurge in terms of the number of people who are homeless, particularly during COVID, and the Salvation Army just really couldn't keep up, because there may need to be 4 or 5 visits before there's a connection. So it just doesn't make sense that the Salvation Army isn't funded to be able to reach out to people who are sleeping rough, because they're not necessarily going to walk in the door of the Salvation Army for a whole range of reasons. I'm not sure if that assists at all.
I guess I was raising the issue about accommodation themselves, and maybe this is not the place to do that. But surely the long-term resolution is to try and find more solutions for accommodation. And if we don't air that in forums like this, where can we? Are there blockages to providing that sort of accommodation? Is it monetary? Is it the availability
Councillor
of properties? I don't know.
Gold, maybe you're happy to leave it at that, because we might have to seek an adjournment if we want to discuss this in more detail. Or suspend standing orders.
I just think it's something worth considering. If we want to move this across to some other forum to discuss, I'm quite happy to do that.
You're happy to discuss it at another occasion and leave, perhaps hear from the other officers and then consider whether you're happy to leave the motions as they are and we consider it this later?
Really looking for guidance whether there was another forum to take that to, because if this is an inappropriate forum, I was asking for guidance on that. If it is, I'm happy to leave it like that. But I'd like to think there was another forum to take it to.
Okay, so maybe we hear from the other officers and then we'll check that you're happy with that and whether we leave it as it is and take it somewhere else later. Yep. So, Mr. Freer.
Thank you, Councillor Addis, as Chair. The motion in respect to the electric line clearance and the Energy Safe Victoria, it's been written in a way, and I guess to continue on from the Chief Executive Officer's statement, in a generic way where each council has its own issue in respect to this. Whilst there's a single set of standards that would be applied across all of Victoria, there are some councils that the issues that we have with the maturity of the limbs on well-established trees, that other councils won't have that issue specifically. They might have something more around new trees that are being planted and the implications over time for them. So in providing it as a combined local government sector response allows us to then call out, I guess, each piece of that. Traditionally, in the past, officers have then worked with the MAV, if these are supported motions, through their work plan to provide much more detail to the submission. When this matter was considered by Council last year, part of the response at that time was to write to the Minister to highlight our specific issues in respect to that. We had a response back from the Minister which didn't go too far to addressing our concerns or making any changes in the legislation, but we've raised that specifically with the Minister in the past as well.
Thank you. And Mr Wickramasinghe.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, the motion has been crafted in the way it has, on the basis that heritage assessment is quite strictly controlled by the provisions or the wording of the practice note. And what we have happening is, it's not only our community who is saying, well, hang on, here is a property which has heritage value that you're not picking up. We've actually got a heritage architect who is an expert in the field when they're doing assessments in our suburban areas saying, this property has heritage value, but by virtue of the fact that the Minister's practice note does not allow it to be captured because it's not within a precinct, means that heritage fabric is lost. So what we're trying to do is create an opportunity for individual properties that would otherwise be captured to be captured. And that's not a problem solely for Boroondara, it's a problem right through metropolitan Melbourne and through the state of Victoria, on the basis that the practice note applies universally. And so it is a stricture on the way we can actually manage our heritage and protect our heritage. So that's why it's controlled. And indeed, each property is assessed by a heritage architect, and it's on that basis a nomination is made having regard to the practice note.
Thank you, Mr Wickramasinghe. Councillor Gold, does that answer your questions?
I think what I'm hearing is that we're part of the MAV. There'll be more opportunities to present in more detail to that group as things evolve, because I just know we carry an awful lot of knowledge in these areas, and I'd like to see it used in that forum as well. So I think, Mr Storer, what you're telling us is you will have opportunity to do that as we go further down the track. So the only thing outstanding in my mind is there another forum which we can take the accommodation issue to that is more appropriate than the motions tonight?
Who would like to comment on that? Ms McLean?
Just to say that Council has been very supportive of advocating around more accommodation for people who are homeless, and particularly around ensuring that there were more apartments that were available in the Markham Avenue development, because the actual ratio of private to public housing was not good in the start. And certainly Council has been extremely active with that, and now my colleague is very active around Bill Street as well. So I think that we've got a very good record in terms of advocating for the provision of more homes for people who find themselves in that situation. I think really it's probably been about a 10-year journey, and we've certainly along the journey have been, we put in numerous motions around that through the MAV and have joined up with other councils in terms of similar letters. So it's one of the things that we have driven very hard, and it was certainly very positive that we were able to get more public housing for the Markham Avenue development. And I believe that's our stance for Bill Street.
Thank you. I think Mr. Ora has something to add, and then I'll come to you, Mayor Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to suggest that we can have a further discussion with councillors. You're interested in a forum, I think, where the issue might gain some further conversation. So I'd suggest that we actually bring that to a discussion with councillors, and we can then talk about what we might do from there.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm just mindful that we're actually in debate, so if we're going to go into questions of officers, I'd prefer that we suspend standing order. So if there are questions of officers, I'd like to move that motion if that comes up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Councillor Biggar, did you have a comment or a question bearing in... Are you speaking to the motion, or did you have a question for officers?
Based on the answers I've just had, I think I'm happy to leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We've gone around a bit of a circle. I feel I should give Councillor Hollingsworth the chance to wrap up. You've said it all, perhaps.
Look, thank you, Madam Chair. Look, just wanted to thank everyone for their comments around the room, and just wanted to reiterate that the MAV is the peak body for all 79 councils within Victoria, have a very defined strategic plan, and certainly societal and social policy changes, planning and building, climate impact and emergency management, waste and resource. They're just some of the key topics that will form the substance of the motions that are going before the MAV on the 21st of May, and that will be collective from all 79 councils. So the motions we're putting forward will be likely to resonate from other councils as well, and collectively we'll be in a position where we can advocate and expand on what we've talked about. The other thing too is there's limited word choice within what we can actually put in the motions too, so that might explain why there's not the level of detail there that you had hoped. But thank you all for your indulgence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hollingsworth. So I now put the motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, so our next item, item 4, is general business. And Councillor Sinfield, I believe you have a motion of condolence you wish to put forward?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I do. Officers have been able to prepare a condolence motion for the Duke of Edinburgh. I'm wondering if that might go on the screen. And I'll speak to it when the time is right.
Thank you. Has everyone had a chance to read that? And Councillor Thompson, you've got your light on to second?
Yeah, I'm happy to second, Chair.
Thank you. For the sake of the mover, is anyone opposed to that motion?
I have some concerns with it.
Okay, so perhaps opposed to it?
This is the first time I've read the motion other than in passing glance not long ago, and I'd like to hear some of the discussion, and I do have some concerns that I'll raise.
So will we suspend standing orders to have this discussion?
No, I think you've got to
Okay. Okay.
For questions of officers and or debate.
Sorry, so we'll...
Questions of officers first.
Yes.
And then debate.
Okay. So questions of officers. Yep. So Councillor Franco, you had a question for the officers?
I'll wait to hear Councillor Sinfield's presentation, and then I'll consider whether I have questions and or comments.
Okay, thank you. So look, I'll now go to the...
Point of order, Chair. I think it might have been forgotten, but the opportunity to ask questions of officers is now, and if they're not asked, then the opportunity is lost. And, you know, that's been our procedure for time immemorial.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Park. Councillor
Is it
Franco,
not correct that we can suspend standing orders in debate?
We can, if that's what people are seeking. Is that the motion you would like to move?
I'm not moving any motion at the moment.
I think it's been suggested that maybe if you have a question, would you like to ask it?
Well, I've suggested I'd prefer to hear the presentation first, and then I'll ask, and I'll request the opportunity to ask any questions, should I have any.
We'll now go back to Councillor Sinfield to speak to her motion.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's entirely appropriate at this point in time, with Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II as our Australian monarch and head of state, as provided for by our constitutional law, that on behalf of our community, we move a condolence motion after the sad and recent passing of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, on the 9th of April 2021. One way His Royal Highness Prince Philip has touched our community locally here in Boroondara is through the Duke of Edinburgh International Award, which is available to all 14 to 24-year-olds, regardless of their background, and many of our community will have participated over the years. The award is comprised of 3 levels: bronze, silver and gold, each progressively more challenging. Participants are required to complete 4 sections at each level: voluntary service, skill, physical recreation and adventurous journey. And since its introduction in 1959, countless Boroondara youths have been encouraged to give their best in pursuit of greatness. And it's the young people of Boroondara who are our future. On a TV broadcast in recent days, Prince Edward said he believed that if you could, he being Prince Philip, believed that if you could tap into a young person's passion, that would drive them to success. And that resonated with me. Having served his country and the Commonwealth tirelessly and diligently and passionately over so many years, may he now rest in peace. On behalf of our community, I and many of my colleagues would like to give thanks for his life of service and offer our prayers for Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II and the royal family. Subsequently, I would like to move the motion that is on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfield. Councillor Thompson, you were the seconder. Would you like to speak to the motion?
I'll reserve my right. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to the motion? Councillor Franco.
Okay. I note that the Prime Minister has said that Australians could send a virtual message to the Queen through the website of the Prime Minister's office, and I've checked and that is currently now available. In fact, the Prime Minister is advocating this as the preferred approach and has made this possible. And so, based on that, I just question why we should be preparing a condolence book for at the Boroondara libraries or the Camberwell Customer Service Centre. So, I mean, I think that's awkward where we write or. So it's not very clear, the motion. But I just question why we need to, why as a local government entity we need to embark down that path. It's one thing to acknowledge the passing of Prince Philip and to provide an official letter of condolence and for the Mayor to send that through, but to utilise local government resources that we've been charged with for providing a book. I mean, that I just question whether that's appropriate. And I also note that the Prime Minister's said that condolence books will be made available at federal MPs' electorate offices and that these will be collected. So he's suggested that that would be possible for those people who prefer to sign a physical book. So And on top of that, we've emphasised as a local government body our e-future, if you like, our electronic future, that we're in forms of engagement whereby we're looking to new forms of electronic engagement rather than old forms of engagement with the community. So based on that, one would think we'd make the condolence book available on our website if we were genuine about that and if we were genuine about the customer first transformation, etc. So that would seem to me, if it were a genuine motion, that would be the approach we'd take. But again, I go back to the point that the Prime Minister's office has already set up this service. So whilst I think it's appropriate to have the acknowledgement, I question the other aspect of that.
Okay, thank you. Did anyone else? Councillor Watson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To be absolutely honest, I've forgotten whether we're in debate or are we asking questions of officers. Where are we at?
We're in debate.
We're in debate. I'd like to offer my support for this particular motion, and it warmed my heart that Councillor Sinfield mentioned the Duke of Edinburgh program. As a mother who had several of her children do that program through Bourne High, and that's a very active program that still runs today, I've seen the influence that it's had on the lives of children, including my own, who set out to achieve different things, and I believe that they benefited from it. I'd also like to see that those schools that run the Duke of Edinburgh program have the opportunity to access the condolence book, because I believe that that's an important engagement with our community. So I support the motion before us. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson, I think you reserved, or would you like, we might wait and you're apparently not entitled to a second chance, I'm being told, Councillor Franco. So I'll now move to our Mayor, who reserved his right to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I do support this motion. Prince Philip has been our longest serving consort to the Queen for 68 years, has seen many, many years of trial and tribulation, working with the Queen through many, many years of different things coming out of the Second World War, effectively. In some respects, Her Majesty the Queen and Prince Philip is a long love story that spans in the order of 80 odd years. And as Councillor Sinfield has indicated, he is the right-hand person to Her Majesty the Queen for so many years. I think it's fitting to reflect upon that and send our condolences. So I'm very happy to support this.
Thank you. Councillor Franco, were you seeking to move an amended motion?
Yes, I'd be happy to move an amended motion just to strike out the second and third, the second component, given and portion of the third, given that those services are already being made available elsewhere.
Okay, well, let's just pause for a minute and see if the officers can put something up on the screen and see if that's what you're seeking.
Chair, can I raise a point of order, please?
Sorry?
Can I raise a point of order, please, in relation to that? If the motion turns out to be as described by Councillor Franco, that will be substantially different from the motion that's on the screen, and I request, if that does eventuate, that my motion be put. Should it fail, another motion be put to the screen.
Yeah, let's see what it is and then perhaps we'll make that call.
Just delete 2 and send the official letter. That's just removing 2. Yes.
Okay, sorry, it's not on my screen. I didn't realise it was up. Councillor Franco, is that? You're in?
Yes.
10?
That is what I had in mind.
Look, my sense is that it is a very different motion, not an amendment. So my inclination is to support the comment that Councillor Sinfield made and to put her motion, and if it fails, then go back to this as another motion. Okay. So
I feel compelled to make a comment. I think it ultimately is a matter in the chair's determination. So that's what you're doing. But I think if we took that approach, it would ordinarily cause proceedings to be much longer than they ought to be. I think it's not, the amendment is an amendment, and it's not such that it reverses the effect of the motion, which has otherwise fallen foul. But I think in any event, it's the chair's decision, and if somebody wanted to move the ruling be overturned, then that's a different question. But I don't think it matters at the end of the day.
Maybe I'll go back to Councillor Sinfield and see if, having seen the motion, if you're happy with it, the suggested amended motion.
Thank you, Chair. No, I'm not happy with the suggested amendment to the motion, and I appreciate that it wasn't circulated ahead of time, as I would have liked to have done, in the spirit of no surprises. But in saying that, it's not designed to be contentious or divisive. I think it's entirely appropriate, as I said, with Her Majesty the Queen in mourning as our monarch here in Australia. To recap on a couple of the issues raised, books are accessible for a portion of our community for those that are computer illiterate or prefer to do something in hard copy. And I think it's an appropriate use of resources in the circumstances. After all that he has given in his life, I think it is absolutely appropriate. And for the majority of us, I think I can speak probably on behalf of most around the table and most in the community, we've learnt so much in the last week after his passing of what he did for us and for the Commonwealth that many of us would have liked to have known earlier. I have nothing further to add to the debate, and I request that my motion, as it is on the screen, is put. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So that does conclude the debate. So I'll now put the motion that's on the screen. All those in favour? So that has been carried unanimously. Thank you. So I'll declare that motion carried. Now, is everyone happy to stand now and have the minutes silence? Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Councillors, are there any other matters of general business? Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly, I'd like to mention the Anzac commemorative service that was held yesterday. May I speak to that for 2 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
Thank
Certainly,
you.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. Councillor Watson and myself had the honour of attending the commemorative service held at Wattle Park, which is in Burwood, just off Riversdale Road. So it's a celebration in memory of servicemen and women that have not just served Burundara or City of Whitehorse or Melbourne as such, but particularly in honour of those that have served in Victoria. The service was, first of all, wonderful to be able to go because, as we all know, in the last year around the lead up to Anzac and Anzac Day, we were unable to go to any services at all, and at best we were able to stand at our front footpaths and pay our respects on Anzac Day. So to see such a high attendance yesterday at Wattle Park, a beautiful outdoor seating where the service is conducted under a lone pine, and the stone memorial there in part of the patriotic area. There was a local Reverend John Mann from the Burwood Uniting Church who spoke, the MC Tom Thorpe, OAM, and various other dignitaries in attendance. But in particular, I just wanted to talk briefly about Dr. Ross McMullen, who is an author of 2 books that he's actually written on Pompey Elliott, who was Major General Harold Edward Elliott, and a person that resided in Burundara, one of Victoria's leading and legendary Anzac heroes, and a person that didn't just fight for our country in battle, but also was a very honoured person in politics. Talking earlier about our heritage overlay and the significance of heritage homes, Pompey Elliott's house on Prospect Hill Road in Camberwell is one that's actually fortunately been protected under heritage overlay because of his notable service to our community. So I just wanted to acknowledge the significance of service. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. Any other matters of general business? Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to step on Councillor Stavrou's toes, and I'm not sure if he was going to speak and mention the QRSL service on Sunday. Before I mention it any further, not that there's too much more to say, I wonder whether Councillor Stavrou would prefer to speak to that.
Let's check. Councillor Stavrou, would you like to make a comment?
Felicity, you can mention it. Save us to say that it will be an honour to be laying a wreath on that service with a number of my fellow councillors. But if you wish to say any more, Felicity, please be my guest.
Thank you. Councillor Sinfield.
Thanks, Chair. Just briefly, the QRSL sub-branch has been not in full operation in recent times, and as a result, the community may be unaware of a planned service this Sunday to mark Anzac Day. So if there is anybody online that is wanting the details, I believe that Tim Smith, the member for Kew, has played a role in organising a service commencing at 5:45 a.m. On the corner of Charles Street and Cotham Road this Sunday morning.
Thank you. I don't see any more lights on, and maybe I'll just follow up with reminding our community that there are in fact many events on that I think every one of us is going to have the pleasure of attending across our municipality and joining with our community to honour those who served us so valiantly. And having been to a number of them, as have most of us, they are a great pleasure and something well worth attending. So we all look forward to an early start. Thank you. So councillors, Councillor Thompson, sorry.
Just very briefly, Chair, and maybe this is something for consideration for next Monday night, but this week saw the passing of a former member for Kooyong, Mr Andrew Peacock, who served our Burundara community exceptionally well for 28 years, and I just recognise that, pass our condolences on to his family. Maybe councillors might turn their minds to a motion to raise in council next week.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Any other matters of general business? No, thank you. So urgent business. Councillors, are there any matters of urgent business? Can't see any lights. Confidential business? No, thank you. That ends our meeting. So thank you to those in the gallery for your attendance. And before I close the meeting, thank you all who have joined us online this evening, and very best wishes to you and your family in maintaining good health. And I declare the Services Delegated Committee meeting closed at 20 to 8. Thank you. Thanks, councillors.